From the very beginning of sacred history, the Garden of Eden has been remembered as a place of beauty, harmony, and divine purpose. It is often seen as the perfect beginning, a world untouched by corruption, where humanity first opened its eyes under the Creator's gaze. And yet, even within this image of perfection, shadows linger at the edges. Among those shadows is a name that has stirred both fascination and fear for centuries, a figure absent from the official text of Genesis, but present in whispers, myths, and hidden traditions. That name is Lilith. Her story does not appear openly in the canonical scriptures. She is not part of the familiar tale of Adam and Eve, of the serpent and the forbidden fruit. Instead, Lilith exists on the margins, glimpsed in ancient folklore, in mystical writings, and in fragments of older mythologies. Some traditions speak of her as Adam's first companion, others as a demoness haunting deserts and night, still others as a symbol of freedom and defiance. Each version raises the same central question: was she simply a myth born of imagination, a dangerous heresy silenced by the guardians of faith, or perhaps a hidden clue about human destiny and divine creation? The fascination with Lilith lies in her ambiguity. She is both forgotten and unforgettable, both feared and sought after. To some, she represents rebellion against order, a refusal to accept roles assigned by heaven. To others, she embodies dignity, courage, and independence, a reminder that even at the dawn of creation, voices of resistance could not be silenced. Her story is more than legend. It is a mirror that reflects humanity's deepest struggles with authority, equality, and freedom. Psalm 1 verse 2 speaks of delighting in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. Yet Lilith has often been remembered not as delight, but as disruption, as the figure who interrupts the expected rhythm and forces us to ask questions that are rarely spoken aloud. Perhaps this is why her legend endures, because it challenges the neatness of sacred history and invites us to see what lies beyond the garden-esque gates. Every generation has reinterpreted Lilith, shaping her image to reflect its own fears, desires, and hopes. She has been demonized, forgotten, reclaimed, and celebrated. Her presence, whether as myth, heresy, or clue, reminds us that history is never only about what is written, but also about what is hidden, what is silenced, and what refuses to disappear. Before we step deeper into this mystery, I invite you to stay with this journey. If you enjoy videos that explore hidden stories, forgotten figures, and the deeper questions of faith and history, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps keep these conversations alive and ensures that voices like Lilith S. continue to be heard. The story of Adam and Eve is one of the most familiar in sacred history, retold countless times in religious teaching, literature, and art. Adam formed from the dust, Eve fashioned from his rib, and together they inhabit the garden under the eye of their Creator. Yet some traditions propose an earlier chapter that the canonical text leaves unspoken. According to legend, before Eve was created, Adam was given another companion, one formed not from his rib, but from the same dust that shaped his body. Her name was Lilith. The idea of Lilith as Adam's first partner introduces a striking tension into the narrative. If both were created from the same material, they stood on equal ground, without hierarchy or dependence. Unlike Eve, whose very origin was linked to Adam's body, Lilith's creation pointed toward a shared essence. This equality became both the foundation of their relationship and the source of their conflict. For where Adam expected submission, Lilith demanded balance. Where he sought dominance, she insisted on standing beside him, not beneath him. The legend tells of their quarrel, a dispute that centered on authority and intimacy. Lilith refused to submit to Adam, arguing that since both were shaped from the earth, Neither had the right to rule over the other. Her words were bold, her stance uncompromising, and in that refusal lay the seed of her exile. Adam turned to God for resolution, and the harmony of the garden was disrupted by a clash of wills. What was intended to be companionship dissolved into separation. Her departure from Eden marked her as an outcast, and yet the silence of Scripture regarding her makes her absence even more intriguing. Why would a story so central to human origins omit such a figure if she truly had no significance? Her erasure, whether deliberate or accidental, created space for centuries of speculation. Folklore filled the gap, painting Lilith as everything, from a victim of injustice to a threat to divine order. She became a reminder that what is forgotten in official history often resurfaces in hidden ways. Lilith's refusal is more than a personal conflict. It touches on universal themes of freedom, authority, and identity. Her legend speaks of the human struggle between submission to imposed structures and the desire for independence. While Adam's story continues openly in the pages of Genesis, Lilith's story lingers at the edges, her absence as meaningful as her presence. In being forgotten, she becomes unforgettable, the first woman that time seemed determined to erase, yet whose memory refuses to fade. In this telling, Eve enters not as the first woman, but as the second. Her creation from Adam's rib reflects a relationship of dependence, a design in which harmony is restored by defining roles more clearly. Lilith's rebellion, then, stands as a sharp contrast to Eve's obedience. Where one resisted authority, the other embraced it, and in this difference lies the foundation of two symbolic paths, one of submission and one of defiance. It is worth noting that the idea of Lilith as Adam's first partner does not appear in the canonical Hebrew Bible, but in later Jewish writings, folklore, and apocryphal traditions. Yet these traditions carry weight, for they show how communities wrestled with the question of equality and authority in human origins. The presence of Lilith in such accounts suggests that her figure was too compelling to ignore, even if she could not be included in the official narrative. Her refusal to be forgotten has consequences for every generation that revisits her story. Some view her as a cautionary tale of pride and rebellion, others as a misunderstood figure who sought fairness in a world unwilling to grant it. In both cases, her legend touches the human heart, because it asks the question that each person must face. Should one accept the order handed down, or resist it when it feels unjust? Lilith's choice to resist cost her a place in Eden, but it gave her a voice that time could not silence. Even though her presence is not acknowledged in Scripture, her absence shaped the way later generations thought about womanhood, obedience, and independence. She became the unseen shadow in the story of Eve, the unspoken contrast that highlighted the virtues of submission by embodying the dangers of rebellion. In forgetting her, tradition made her unforgettable, for absence can be more haunting than presence. The legend of Lilith as Adam's first companion may not be part of the canon, but it has endured because it touches something deep within the human spirit. It reflects the longing for equality, the struggle for identity, and the cost of defiance. She remains the first woman that time forgot, yet her story continues to rise from the silence, reminding us that what is cast aside often holds the key to hidden truths. As the centuries passed, Lilith's image transformed. No longer remembered as a companion of Adam, she was recast in darker tones, her legend reshaped into that of a dangerous spirit haunting desolate places. In Jewish folklore and mystical writings, her presence became one of fear. She was no longer the voice of equality, but the embodiment of terror. The alphabet of Ben Sirah, a medieval text that blended folklore with biblical imagination, presents one of the most vivid accounts of her. In this retelling, Lilith flees Eden after her quarrel with Adam and takes residence in the wilderness. When God sends angels to bring her back, she refuses. choosing freedom over return. Her defiance is punished, and she is cursed to wander as a demoness, a figure of night and danger. She becomes associated with harming infants, stealing newborns from their mothers, and haunting men in their sleep. Such imagery reflects deep cultural anxieties. Infant mortality was a harsh reality in the ancient world, and mothers lived with constant fear for their children. To personify that fear in the figure of Lilith gave shape to the unexplainable tragedies of life. The belief that she prowled in darkness, seeking to harm the most vulnerable, turned her into a symbol of all that threatened family, life, and future generations. The Zohar, the central work of Jewish mysticism, further expanded her role. In its mystical vision, Lilith is depicted not only as a threat to infants, but also as a seductress who lures men into sin. She is portrayed as the queen of demons, a figure linked to lust, corruption, and destruction. Her presence is bound up with the dangers of uncontrolled desire and the fragility of human morality. In this role, she becomes less a historical figure and more a cosmic force, embodying the dangers of the untamed and the unrestrained. By casting Lilith as a demoness, tradition gave voice to fears about sexuality and independence. A woman who refused submission became a symbol of disorder, an embodiment of chaos that threatened the carefully constructed boundaries of family and faith. Her legend became a warning, reminding women to remain obedient and men to remain vigilant. In this way, folklore transformed her from a forgotten companion into an eternal danger. Yet her presence as a demoness also reveals how powerful her image remained. Even when condemned, she could not be erased. By turning her into a figure of fear, tradition ensured that her memory would continue, even if only as a cautionary tale. Fear preserved what silence could not erase. Apotropaic charms and amulets were crafted to ward off Lilith's supposed attacks, inscribed with names of angels or sacred words. These artifacts show that belief in her was not confined to stories, but entered daily life. Families sought protection from her, proving that she was seen as more than a legend. She had become a real threat in the imagination, a shadow that demanded constant vigilance. In many ways, Lilith's transformation into a demoness was less about her and more about the fears of the community. She was shaped by their anxieties, molded into a figure who explained the dangers they could not control. Death, lust, sickness, temptation, and loss were given a name and a face. By calling her Lilith, people gave meaning to what otherwise would have been chaos. Her image as a demoness in the desert solidified her role as an outsider, a figure beyond the walls of order. Yet even in this role, she carried traces of her earlier defiance. Her refusal to return to Eden and accept submission remained at the heart of her story, even if transformed into a curse. Whether remembered as a woman or as a demon, she continued to embody resistance, independence, and danger, a reminder that what is cast out does not simply vanish, but takes on new shapes in the imagination of those who remember. To understand Lilith fully, one must look beyond the boundaries of Jewish folklore and examine the wider landscape of the ancient Near East. Her image did not emerge in isolation, but echoed figures that predated her by centuries. In Mesopotamian mythologies, beings resembling her appear with striking familiarity, suggesting that Lilith was not born out of nothing but inherited traits from older traditions. One such figure is Lilitu, a spirit mentioned in Sumerian and Akkadian texts. Like Lilith, Lilitu was associated with the night and the desert, with seduction and danger. She was believed to prey upon men and infants, haunting desolate places and slipping into homes unseen. The similarity of name and function has led many scholars to see Lilith as a continuation of this older archetype, reshaped within Hebrew imagination, but carrying the same essence of fear and allure. Another parallel can be found in Lamashtu, a Mesopotamian demoness feared for her attacks on infants and mothers. She was depicted as a terrifying hybrid, with the head of a lioness, the teeth of a donkey, and the claws of a bird. Mothers wore amulets to protect their children from her, inscribed with prayers and charms to drive her away. The resemblance to later Jewish practices against Lilith is unmistakable, suggesting that these traditions flowed into one another across time and culture. Even Inanna, the great goddess of Sumer, carried aspects that echo Lilith's image. In some myths, her darker sides emerge, linked with sexuality, independence, and danger. While not a demoness, Inanna's complexity shows that ancient cultures often grappled with the duality of women as both life-giving and threatening, nurturing and destructive. Lilith, in her later form, reflects this tension, embodying the shadowed side of femininity that cultures sought to define and control. These parallels remind us that myths do not exist in isolation. Stories cross borders, absorb influences, and reshape themselves in new contexts. The Hebrew imagination inherited a world already rich with legends of spirits of the night, demons of the desert, and goddesses of power. Lilith's figure may have been born in Eden's shadow, but her roots stretch deep into the soil of Mesopotamia. Her association with the night is particularly telling. In many ancient cultures, night represented danger, the unknown, the time when boundaries dissolved and fears took shape. To personify the night as a feminine figure gave concrete form to those fears, transforming abstract danger into a being who could be named, resisted, or appeased. Lilith's name became part of that ancient vocabulary of fear, linking her to the universal human struggle against what cannot be controlled. The blending of mythologies reveals that Lilith is not simply a Jewish invention, but part of a larger spiritual tapestry. Her legend reflects a convergence of ideas about women, power, and danger that circulated across civilizations. By inheriting and reshaping these echoes, Jewish tradition gave her new meaning, but the underlying themes remained. Independence as threat, sexuality as danger, and wilderness as a place where order dissolves. Yet within these myths lies not only fear, but fascination. Figures like Lilitu and Lamashtu were feared, but they were also respected as powerful. Their presence was not easily dismissed, for they embodied forces that could not be ignored. Lilith inherited this duality, feared as a demoness but remembered with persistence, her legend too compelling to disappear. By tracing these echoes, but a reflection of ancient humanity's attempt to grapple with the mysteries of life, death, sexuality, and independence. She's a thread woven into a fabric much older and broader than Eden, a fragment of a shared mythological language that continues to shape imagination and belief. As her legend developed, Lilith came to embody a paradox. To some, she was a threat, a figure whose defiance undermined the order established by God. To others, she represented a voice of freedom, a symbol of resistance against domination. This tension has defined her image through the ages, shaping how communities have remembered or rejected her. The heart of the conflict lies in her refusal to submit to Adam. In the eyes of tradition, that refusal was rebellion against the divine structure of creation. To question the roles assigned in Eden was to question God's design itself, and for this reason she was condemned as dangerous. Order depended on hierarchy, and Lilith's defiance appeared as a threat to the very foundation of harmony. Yet from another perspective, her refusal can be seen not as sin, but as courage. She did not accept a role that denied her equality, insisting instead on her dignity as one created from the same dust as Adam. Her departure from Eden, then, becomes not merely a punishment but a choice. The price of freedom was exile, yet she embraced it rather than compromise her identity. This dual reading explains why her image has been so contested. For those invested in preserving order, she is the embodiment of chaos. For those seeking symbols of independence, she is a forgotten heroine. The same act of defiance can be cast either as destruction or liberation, depending on the lens through which it is viewed. Her story raises timeless questions about the relationship between authority and freedom. Is obedience always the highest virtue, or does integrity sometimes demand resistance? Are roles in creation fixed beyond question, or is there space for negotiation, dialogue, and change? Lilith's legend suggests that the answers to these questions have never been simple, for her memory continues to spark debate across cultures and generations. In many ways, she embodies the human struggle between belonging and autonomy. To remain in Eden would have meant acceptance, but at the cost of selfhood. To leave Eden meant solitude, but with the preservation of her identity. This tension is not unique to her, but speaks to the human condition, the choices each person must make between security and freedom, obedience and individuality. Her condemnation as a demoness reflects the fear that freedom can become dangerous when unchecked. Independence unsettles order, and order seeks to protect itself by branding independence as threat. In this way, Lilith's demonization was not merely about her, but about the anxiety of a community facing the challenge of maintaining structure. By making her a monster, tradition reinforced the boundaries it needed to survive. Yet her continued presence in memory shows that freedom cannot be silenced so easily. Even when cast as dangerous, her voice lingers. She refuses to disappear, reminding us that what is labeled chaos may also be creativity. What is condemned as rebellion may also be truth. Her story becomes a mirror, reflecting not only her own choices but the values and fears of those who told it. In the end, Lilith is both threat and voice, both warning and inspiration. She unsettles because she refuses to be confined to one meaning. She can be read as the destroyer of order or as the defender of dignity, and perhaps it is this very ambiguity that makes her legend so enduring. She is the question that cannot be answered, the figure who challenges us to decide whether freedom is worth the cost of exile, and whether order without freedom is truly harmony at all. As the biblical canon was being shaped, decisions had to be made about which stories were preserved as sacred truth and which were left in silence. In that process, the figure of Lilith disappeared almost completely. Her name appears only briefly in Isaiah 34 verse 14, where she is described as a night creature dwelling in desolation. But even this reference is vague and has been translated in various ways. Beyond that single passing mention, she does not walk the pages of Scripture. For a figure so widely remembered in folklore and mystical tradition, such silence is striking. One reason for this silence may have been the danger her story posed to established structures. If Lilith was acknowledged as Adam's first partner, created equally from the dust, the foundation of gender hierarchy would be unsettled. Eve, formed from Adam's rib, reinforces a relationship of dependence and harmony through submission. Lilith, by contrast, embodies resistance and equality. Including her in the canon would have introduced a narrative that challenged the very order the Church sought to preserve. The guardians of tradition were deeply concerned with protecting orthodoxy. Heresy was not simply disagreement, but a threat to the unity of faith and community. By suppressing stories like Lilith's, Church leaders ensured that the memory of human origins emphasized obedience, not rebellion, submission, not equality. To elevate Eve as the first woman reinforced the roles that were considered necessary for family and society. Lilith, if remembered, could disrupt that order, making her absence a deliberate act of silence. The history of apocryphal texts and folklore shows how selective memory can be. Stories that did not fit the desired narrative were pushed to the margins, labeled dangerous or irrelevant. Yet these silenced stories never truly disappeared. They lingered in whispers, in mystical writings, in superstitions passed down through households. The silence of Scripture did not erase Lilith. It made her even more mysterious, a name carried in shadows rather than in light. In medieval times, the Church often associated Lilith with witchcraft, temptation, and forbidden practices. Her image became bound to heresy, a figure invoked to warn against stepping outside the safe boundaries of faith. To mention her was to risk inviting suspicion. Silence became both a shield and a weapon, protecting orthodoxy while casting doubt upon any who dared to remember her differently. This act of omission highlights an important truth about tradition. What is not said can speak as loudly as what is declared. By excluding Lilith, the canon sent a message about what should be valued and what should be forgotten. Yet the persistence of her legend shows that silence does not always succeed. Her name continued to surface in mystical circles, in folklore, and eventually in new interpretations that reclaimed her story. For many centuries, Lilith remained a figure associated with heresy, dangerous not only because of who she was, but because of what she represented. To remember her was to question hierarchy, to challenge accepted roles, and to hint that the official story was incomplete. Such questioning threatened the foundations of order, and so her story was kept in the shadows. And yet, the very act of suppression ensured that she would one day be rediscovered. Forgotten voices often return with greater force, carrying with them the weight of centuries of silence. Lilith's absence from the canon did not make her irrelevant, it made her a mystery, and mysteries invite exploration. Her silence became her power, for it raised the question of why she was hidden at all. The Church's choice to suppress Lilith was not simply about one figure, but about the broader struggle between control and freedom, memory and omission. She is a reminder that what is labeled heresy may sometimes hold truths too challenging for their time. Her silence in Scripture is not the end of her story, but a signpost pointing to questions that remain unanswered. As Lilith's legend spread through the centuries, she found new life in the imagination of those who walked outside the boundaries of Orthodox faith. Witches, sorcerers, and seekers of forbidden knowledge began to see her not as a demoness to be feared, but as a patron, a muse, and even a source of power. Her transformation from outcast to inspiration reveals the enduring appeal of her defiance. In medieval demonology, Lilith was often listed among the great figures of darkness, accused of aiding witches in their practices and consorting with spirits of rebellion. Manuals written to warn against witchcraft described her as a temptress, a queen of the night who guided those who sought power outside the Church. By casting her as an ally of witches, tradition once again reinforced her image as a danger to order. Yet for those condemned as witches, such association could also serve as a symbol of solidarity, a shared identity with one who defied authority. Renaissance grimoires, books of magic and hidden knowledge, sometimes invoked Lilith in rituals of summoning. Her presence was believed to grant access to forbidden wisdom, to powers that the Church considered dangerous, but that seekers of knowledge desired. To call upon her was to embrace risk, but also to claim independence from the constraints of orthodoxy. Her legend became a tool for those who wished to step beyond accepted boundaries. The fascination with Lilith in occult traditions speaks to her enduring duality. She was feared as a demon, yet sought after as a guide. She embodied danger, yet also empowerment. Those who felt excluded by the structures of religion found in her a mirror of their own marginalization. Just as she had been cast out of Eden, they too had been cast out of society. In Lilith, they saw not only a figure of fear, but also a companion in exile. The imagery of Lilith as the Queen of Witches gave her a new role in cultural imagination. No longer merely a destroyer of infants or seductress of men, she became a sovereign figure of the night, leading legions of spirits and guiding those who resisted the Church. This transformation shows how myths adapt, reshaping themselves to serve new purposes and new communities. In art and literature of the Renaissance and beyond, Lilith appeared as both beautiful and terrifying. A woman whose allure concealed danger, but whose independence fascinated the imagination. She inspired poets, painters, and mystics who sought to capture the mystery of her dual nature. Her image became part of the larger myth of the witch, a woman who defied authority, possessed hidden knowledge, and lived outside the boundaries of order. For many who were accused of witchcraft, Lilith's legend offered a narrative of empowerment. If society condemned them as dangerous, they could embrace that condemnation as a form of strength. To be associated with Lilith was to share in her defiance, to claim identity in resistance. Her story became less about punishment and more about possibility, a reminder that even exile can carry dignity. The figure of Lilith, as the witch's muse, carried forward into modern esoteric traditions. In contemporary occultism, she is often invoked as a goddess or spirit of independence, sexuality, and power. Her image has shifted once again, no longer bound solely to fear, but celebrated as a source of strength for those who seek freedom from imposed boundaries. Her role as muse highlights how legends can be reshaped by the communities that claim them. Lilith did not remain fixed as a demoness in the desert, but evolved into a symbol for witches, artists, and seekers across the ages. She is both the shadow and the inspiration, feared by some, celebrated by others, and always remembered as one who refused to bow. In modern times, Lilith has risen again, not as a demoness or witch's muse, but as a symbol of liberation and empowerment. Feminist theology, literature, and art have reclaimed her story, transforming her from a figure of fear into a voice of strength. What was once condemned as rebellion is now celebrated as courage, and her legend has found new meaning in a world grappling with equality and justice. Writers and thinkers began to revisit her legend, asking why she was forgotten, why her story was silenced, and what it reveals about the treatment of women in sacred history. By reframing her defiance not as sin, but as affirmation of dignity, they uncovered a figure who embodies the struggle against oppression. Lilith's refusal to submit to Adam became a declaration of independence, a choice to preserve identity even at the cost of exile. In literature, poets and novelists gave her voice, imagining her side of the story, portraying her not as a monster, but as a woman wronged, misunderstood, and forgotten. These retellings invite readers to see her not through the eyes of fear, but through the eyes of compassion. They ask what it means to be erased from memory, and what it means to reclaim a story after centuries of silence. In psychology, Lilith has been used as a symbol of the unconscious, the hidden side of femininity that patriarchal culture has suppressed. She represents desires, instincts, and powers that have been denied, but that continue to shape human experience. In this way, she becomes a reminder that what is repressed does not vanish but waits to be acknowledged. Feminist theologians see in Lilith a challenge to the traditional interpretation of creation. If she was truly Adam's equal, then her refusal to submit raises profound questions about how we understand gender, authority, and divine intention. By reclaiming her story, they seek to restore a balance lost in centuries of silence, giving voice to the side of humanity that was deliberately excluded. Art has also embraced her resurrection. Paintings, sculptures, and performances have depicted her not as a demon, but as a proud, defiant figure, reclaiming the power that was denied to her. She stands not in shadows, but in light, not as a threat, but as a symbol of resilience. Through such art, she is given back the dignity that folklore once stripped away. Her modern reinterpretation does not deny the darker aspects of her legend, but transforms them. Where she was once accused of harming infants, she is now seen as a protector of women's rights. Where she was cast as a seductress, she is reimagined as a symbol of sexual freedom. Each accusation becomes an opportunity for redefinition, turning condemnation into empowerment. This resurrection of Lilith speaks to the power of memory and imagination. Stories that were once used to control can be retold to inspire. Legends that condemned can be reinterpreted to liberate. By reclaiming Lilith, modern thinkers are not only restoring a forgotten figure, but challenging the structures that erased her. She has become a voice for those who refuse silence, a reminder that exile does not mean defeat, and that forgotten stories can return with greater force. In her resurrection, she embodies the hope that what was once used to oppress can be transformed into a source of freedom. Lilith stands again, not as a demoness in the desert, but as a symbol of dignity, resilience, and liberation for a new age. As the legend of Lilith unfolds through history, she emerges not only as a myth or a warning, but as a mirror reflecting human questions about creation, freedom, and identity. Her absence from scripture speaks as loudly as her presence in folklore, and her evolution from forgotten companion to demoness, from witch's muse to feminist icon, reveals how each generation has wrestled with her meaning. She is more than a shadow behind Eden. She is a reminder of the stories that live between silence and memory. For some, she will always be a heresy, a distortion of divine truth, a rebellion against God's order that could never belong in sacred tradition. For others, she is a myth, a fragment of Mesopotamian imagination carried into Hebrew thought and reshaped through centuries of storytelling. Yet for those who look deeper, she may be something else entirely, a hidden clue about the complexity of human freedom, about the balance between equality and authority, and about the voices that history has tried to erase. When we look at Lilith, we are confronted with questions about what it means to be human. If she was created from the same dust as Adam, then equality lies at the very root of existence. If she chose exile rather than submission, then freedom is bound to sacrifice. If she was demonized by tradition, then perhaps her image reflects the fears and anxieties of those who sought to control her memory. In every layer of her legend, there is a reflection of humanity's struggle with the boundaries of order and the cost of independence. Her story also raises questions about the divine. Was her exclusion a sign of rejection or a test of freedom? Did her defiance reflect rebellion against God, or did it reveal a deeper truth about the complexity of creation itself? Sacred history is often written in harmony and order, yet the presence of Lilith, even in silence, suggests that divine mystery cannot be confined to neat categories. She represents the unknown, the hidden dimension of creation that unsettles certainty and invites reflection. Throughout time, every culture has needed figures like Lilith. She embodies the wilderness beyond the garden, the night beyond the day, the voice beyond the silence. Her legend reminds us that what is forgotten is never truly lost, and what is cast out often carries truths too uncomfortable to remain within the walls of order. In her, we find not only fear but fascination, not only condemnation but resilience. In modern reinterpretations, she becomes more than a warning. She stands as a symbol of dignity reclaimed, of identity preserved in exile, of power discovered in resistance. Her resurrection in literature, art, and theology suggests that forgotten voices can rise again, carrying with them the hope of renewal and balance. The mystery of Lilith is not about whether she truly walked in Eden, but about what her legend reveals. Is she a myth? Perhaps. Is she heresy? To some, yes. But she is also a clue, a sign that creation is richer and more complex than simple narratives can capture. In her defiance, we see the cost of freedom. In her silence, we see the weight of omission. And in her resurrection, we see the possibility of transformation. Lilith reminds us that stories are not static. They live, they change, they speak differently to each generation. Her legend is not finished, for she continues to challenge, inspire, and provoke reflection. She stands as both shadow and light, both warning and invitation, both danger and promise. And in her mystery, we are reminded that God's creation holds depths that no single story can contain. Thank you for joining this journey into the mystery of Lilith, her legend, her silence, and her resurrection. If this exploration has given you something to think about, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you never miss future content. Make sure to like this video to help it reach more people. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or questions, and share this video with your family and friends so the conversation can continue to grow.